Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, Principal Atmospheric Scientist with Nutrient Ag Solutions, and I want to thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. Now, as we look here at this first map, which shows you the hours spent below freezing during the time period of the 19th through the 25th, we can see that the extent of the frost did get through parts of the Piedmont, even into parts of the coastal plain. So there was just very brief moments in the early morning hours over here in parts of North Carolina that we did get those temperatures below freezing last week. And so this was a pretty late freeze for us, and it just kind of puts together the full perspective on what April did. And that's kind of what we're looking at so far. April 1st here through the 26th, looking at average temperature ranks by climate district. And again, we can see that we have had, on the whole, a relatively chilly April so far compared to our climatological normals. Now, this was overall a bust forecast by myself and almost all other meteorologists. This was just something that this big blocked pattern that set up over here in the Pacific, where the big high went into Alaska with a low to its south, just bunched everything up and allowed for a lot of cold air to come out. And now we're seeing the full ramifications of that. Now, this pattern has broken. We're going over into a much different regime as we move forward, and we're going to talk about that in a few moments. But want to complete our view here on the stats by looking at precipitation ranks by climate district. And overall, the wettest conditions have been in the upper Midwest. They've been here in parts of the Mid-South and Missouri, and then really down here, extremely wet along the Gulf Coast. Overall, across North Carolina, we're sitting just a shade on the drier side of things, which this time of year, things can dry out quite quickly as we're in the fields getting a lot of field work done. So we see the numbers over here representing, below average on precipitation over the last 26 days or so. This past weekend, severe storms ripped out of the Red River Valley of the South over into the lower Mississippi River Valley on Friday, and then by the time we got into Saturday, they were moving into parts of Alabama and Georgia. But for the most part, all of this stayed to our south. And if we look back over the weekend on total precipitation, we can see here where those storms were located. But we do notice that once you get over to North Carolina, you get east of that line there, things were relatively dry this past weekend with the cooler and wetter weather farther to the west in the Appalachian Mountains. So this, again, is just a quick look at our last weekend's worth of precipitation. Now, early this morning, I was kind of watching the sunrise here. We've had high pressure in place, so you can see the clear skies early this morning as the sun was rising here. But there's a system to the west we're watching very carefully. You can almost see it coming out of California here, and it's going to erupt in the plains on Tuesday. And the question is, how long is that going to take to get over to us to cause some problems? And we're going to answer that question right away. First, though, I got to take you to the other side of the world here. I'm going to go over to Europe for a moment. Corn and soybean farmers, listen up. Deep trough that's cutting into the Iberian Peninsula. There's another one here, and that is just south of the Black Sea. That's the region I'm drawing around here. So when we think about what's going on with this deeper trough cutting through the eastern side of Europe, it's actually been producing some snow. There were snow reports in Ukraine. So while we were cold a week ago, much of Europe's growing regions have been cold as well. And at the very end of this video, we'll bring you up to speed on what's happening also in South America. But right now, I'm going to come back over to the U.S. and let's take a look at the main features here. This is the slow-moving trough we're going to watch come into the plains Monday, then get out here into Tuesday. And it's going to produce a low-pressure center that's going to slowly move its way toward the northeast. We got some big questions as to what that's going to do for us in terms of precipitation later on this week, because there's quite a bit of model discrepancy in what's going to happen there. So I'm going to get there and talk to you about those main features. First, the upper level patterns where we're going to be able to diagnose this, okay? So this ridge that builds in Tuesday into Wednesday, that's bringing in the heat. So we're going to see some very warm temperatures. But here is the trough digging now through Arizona, New Mexico. It kind of splits a little bit. I shouldn't say that. It breaks apart from the main trough to the north and slowly meanders across the lower Mississippi River Valley and eventually here over toward Georgia, Florida, and that region by the end of this week. Now that will bring in a cooler shot of air toward the end of this week and weekend, as you see in this trough. But I want to just make note of something. Unlike what we were talking about over the last couple of weeks, there's nothing blocking this flow up in the Pacific. So if I just took you quickly, I heard about day 10, and you just see there's a trough and then a downstream ridge and a trough and a downstream ridge. And the deepest and coldest air is sitting here over parts of Europe. So we do see this moving toward a milder pattern, but we do have to ask ourselves, what does this mean towards precipitation? Because we do have quite a bit of field work left to be done in the Carolinas as we progress through spring. Now, over the next 3 days here, with that system emerging, extremely windy conditions in the midsection of the country. You're looking here at wind gusts through Wednesday morning, some places 50 to 60 miles an hour. But things are going to be a bit calmer for us as we're under the influence of a large area of higher pressure. So while red flag warnings and high wind warnings are in place here, the warm-up combined with the higher pressure is going to keep us over on the drier side of things. The severe weather stays in the southern plains. This is the risk on Tuesday, the 27th, and going out into even Wednesday. We still see that boundary lingering very slowly over here far to our west. So we got to ask, when is it going to get here? Well, we're looking at surface precipitation type and intensity, and also those contours in the background are pressure. And I just actually walked you all the way through 5 p.m. on Monday. You can see the presence of the higher pressure, calmer winds, beautiful day on tap here. And as I go out through the day on Tuesday and now into the day on Wednesday, we just don't have anything kind of penetrating through that higher atmospheric pressure. So we're warm, we are dry through the middle part of this week. When do things start to shift over? Well, if you're favoring the European, which I am, I don't see it happening for a while. And you say, why? Well, on that stalled out boundary right in through here where the heavy rain's going to come in, the low pressure center rides right along it and then heads on off toward the north and east. The upper level wave breaks this into 2 separate waves with a southern one going here. And in the middle, we're kind of left high and dry, split between these 2 systems over in the Carolinas. Now, the GFS wants to keep everything connected, and that's why it eventually tries to sweep a front through the Carolinas, increasing our precipitation chances as this progresses throughout the end of this week. I'll show you the timing in just a few moments. But if we look at it another way, this is what the European model says in terms of precipitation anomalies. And as you can tell, this whole area is showing up on the drier side of things. But do note this, Iowa, Nebraska, the Dakotas, northern Illinois, these areas are going to be rapidly planting this week. So corn and soybean farmers in the Carolinas expect major progress to be made in parts of the Midwest and Western Corn Belt, just given the precipitation patterns, because that's also shown in the GFS. Now you can see the GFS trying to return this front through here, increasing precipitation to about Raleigh, drier to the east. But it's still a much different precipitation pattern than what the European says. Now you say, why do I favor the European? Well, statistically, over the last week, the European model has had a 7% increase or 7% bias over the GFS in its skill forecast. So it's been doing better by about 7%. So I'm going to show you the European model. Now, we've already walked through this out until Wednesday. All right, there's Wednesday afternoon and evening. You still see the influence of the higher pressure. The stalled out boundary is here, cutting through the Mid-South into the Midwest. So Thursday, getting into Friday morning. Now, this is where the GFS drops the front right through this area and increases the precipitation. But you can see that European has a front here, but it's actually redeveloping a low on the back side that's going to go farther to the south. So the frontal boundary that comes through is starved a bit for moisture in the European model. And that's why by Friday afternoon and evening, we do need to be on the lookout for scattered showers and storms, but the European model is not calling for widespread coverage of wetter conditions, whereas the GFS is a bit wetter. You see it's got this other system farther to the south, and then that stays to our south. Now we're out here a full week. This is now into next Monday. And if I just keep this playing, you're like, well, I just don't see a lot happening here. And the longer range models would support that as well. And that's because in general, by day 10, like we talked about, the flow dips into a trough here, little ridge north of Hawaii, a trough in the Gulf of Alaska, and a broad ridge that's kind of centered right here across the United States. Now, what you need to see when you look at this is that the Pacific is not blocked up. That's open flow. And it's a little bit farther to the north. And as a result of that pattern, this is not something that makes us overly wet into week 2. And this is the European. You can see a similar setup with the ridge here, trough on the west coast. We call that the negative P&A pattern, and then just broad ridging across much of the rest of the United States. So the translation is this. Where's the wetter weather forecast by the models? It's in the northern plains, upper Midwest, heading into the northeast. We tend to favor, well, near normal or drier conditions. The GFS is bought into the same thing. Different color bar, same story. The wetter conditions are here, and we're looking at possibly a drier week 2 time period. Now, I want to throw in a caveat to this, and the caveat is that the models are washing out the pattern. And this is how we look at this. This is the way I look at it. You see, when I tell you that we're using the GFS ensemble or the European ensemble, what I'm talking about is we actually run the model 30 different times in the GFS and 50 times in the European. And what you end up getting is a different solution each time. If all of these solutions tend to look the same or they tend to diverge, that tells us something. And right now, about the only thing they tell us is that the jet stream pattern, when averaged together, is a bit farther to the north. That would indicate mild conditions. And we don't see any big high amplitude consistency, which is why we tend to see drier conditions. But there's a lot of spread in this, is what I want to explain, which is why those week 2 forecasts, well, we're not going to put all of our hope in them as being accurate. Now, they affect the temperature pattern as well. And certainly this morning, things have gone over mild. We're already here at 8 o'clock Central Time, so 9 o'clock East Coast Time, already in the low 50s near Raleigh and then towards 60 along the coast. What are our temperatures doing? Well, today's highs, we're going to get here into the 70s. But watch what's coming out of the Midwest. See that? 90s in Nebraska. That's Tuesday. Look at your temperatures now climbing up toward 80. There's Wednesday. There's the warm-up I was telling you about into Thursday. And as the front tries to come through later on this week, it brings in just a quick cool down. But I mean, that's not that cold compared to average. And it's out of there pretty quickly. Notice by the time I get to Sunday, we're already warming up. And the day 5 through 10 says, get that cooler air out quickly, replace it with some warmer conditions behind it. And that's what both the GFS and the European are doing out there to day 10. Now, beyond that, the models are picking up on that negative PNA pattern. Again, Pacific North American pattern when it's in its negative phase has a bit more troughing along the West Coast. So I do expect to see broad scale warmth in the midsection, and I expect this to push east. And the GFS is showing that as well. Now, in the last few moments here, I want to talk longer term, and I want to talk about South America. The longer term discussion begins with the progression of the MJO. While it was stuck here for so much of April, we were cold. But coming out into phase 8, eventually into phase 1, this is a warmer phase here. And the fact that it doesn't swing down here into the Indian Ocean, which is phases 2 and 3, and instead is forecast to come back toward null space, is good overall for our forecast for milder conditions. And that's why when we look out here with the CFSV2 model, that's a model run in the United States, for the time period of May 9th through the 15th, we see cooler air, and this is consistent with the MJO, in the Canadian Prairie, in the northern plains, and generally speaking, more broad-scale warmth in our neck of the woods. Is that echoed in the European? Well, this is the European forecast out there to May 15th, and again, we see that same pattern, much more mild here along the mid-Atlantic through the Carolina coast. Let's add another dimension to this. Let's kind of get down in the weeds here. You ready for this? Momentum. When you see the warmer colors, that's high momentum coming out of the west. The cooler colors mean weaker momentum coming out of the west. Now, why is that significant? Well, when this cold air began right here after Easter, let's just draw a line on it. Right there, okay? We lost the strong momentum in the polar jet stream. It weakened. See that? You see the colors disappearing? And we saw quite a bit of these negative colors indicating a loss of momentum from about 40 north to 20 north. But what we saw develop was right here. That is some strong westerly winds aloft. And the last time we saw that was back here at the end of February going into March, which turned out mild for much of North America. Now, I bring that up because to compare this to a recent year where we went from a cold April to a very warm May, well, that was in 2018. And the jet stream got very fast here and very fast there, but it broke apart across North America. And it moved pretty far to the north. That's the whole month of May's jet stream pattern. See that? Now, why I show you that is that currently, this is what the flow of the atmosphere is going to look like. Now, you don't see the winds here, but I can draw it for you. The jet stream appears to be splitting a bit here. See that? You can see the split across the west. The warmer colors here indicate a more northward trajectory of the jet stream as it kind of comes across like that. And we put all that together, and this tends to favor more mild conditions for us. Now, in May of 2018, it was extremely mild. This is your statewide average temperature ranks for May of 2018. And when we get over to the precipitation side of things, well, you can see if I just click here, it was wet along the coast. Now, is that going to be the scenario that we're going to be dealing with here? Let's go back and take a look at it. Temperatures first for the month of May. We definitely see the milder conditions, okay? What about that precipitation pattern? Well, it is forecasting wetter than normal conditions. So the drier conditions we could be getting here over the next 10 plus days seem to fade in the longer term model runs should this be the scenario that sets up. And speaking of fading precipitation chances, the last map I want to take you to is South America. And I know I haven't covered a lot of South America lately in your forecast video, but there is significant drought in southern Brazil, and a lot of the safrinha crop is grown between those two arrows. This is Mato Grosso, wetter to the north, but there's a lot of concern that as you look over the next 10 days, we're not adding any precipitation. Probably the state in the worst shape is Paraná. Now, just so you know, that state is about the size of Illinois, and they grow a lot of safrinha crop there. This is Mato Grosso do Sul. Some places in Paraná and Mato Grosso do Sul did not measure precipitation so far in April, and that's really hurting the safrinha crop pretty bad. The monsoon shuts down right about this time of year, so we expect this area to go over drier as we get into the month of May, and this could continue to kind of eat away at the potential for that safrinha crop. I just want to bring it to your attention, all right? Have a good rest of your week, and I'll talk to you again on Monday. Thanks.